Welcome, sleepy traveler. You've arrived at a quiet space made just for you. My name is Valarie, and I am here to guide you gently into rest, to help ease your mind, soften your body, and drift you toward a peaceful, uninterrupted sleep. Whether your day was long or your thoughts feel a little too loud tonight, let this be your permission to slow down, to breathe, and to simply be. There's nothing more to do now. Just allow my voice to be your guide as we begin this gentle journey toward deep, nourishing rest. If you're new here, subscribe for sleep content like this, and like this video if you find it enjoyable. Let's begin. Take a slow, gentle breath in and let it out with a soft sigh. Feel the weight of the day begin to loosen. Everything you have carried, every thought and every little tension can slowly begin to drift away. There is nothing you need to hold on to right now. You are safe in this moment. This is your time, a soft corner of the day that belongs only to you. A place where the world grows quiet and your body can finally rest. Notice the gentle rise and fall of your chest. Each breath arriving, each breath leaving like the calm rhythm of ocean waves. Your mind may wander, and that is perfectly okay. Every thought that appears can drift away like a small cloud in the open sky. There is no need to chase it, no need to hold it. The sky of your mind is wide and endless, and your thoughts are just passing travelers. Feel your shoulders softening. They may have been carrying the weight of your day, but now they can release it. Imagine that weight sliding gently down your arms and out through your fingertips. Your arms are heavy and warm. Your hands resting easily, as if they are melting into the surface beneath you. Bring your awareness to your jaw. Let your tongue relax and your lips soften. Even your cheeks can grow slack and calm. There is nothing you need to say, nothing you need to do. You are allowed to simply be. Now focus on your eyes. Even if they are closed, imagine a soft warmth spreading around them. across your forehead, down into your temples, every muscle of your face easing into rest. Take another slow, gentle breath and let it out, longer this time. Feel how your chest rises like a soft balloon filling with air. And then deflates with a gentle sigh. Each breath is a wave of calm moving through you. Now imagine a soft golden light above you. It is warm but gentle, like sunlight filtered through morning mist. It begins to drift down, touching the crown of your head. And as it touches you, it brings a deep feeling of relaxation. Like every cell is sighing with relief. The golden light moves slowly down your body, over your forehead, soothing away any lingering tension. Over your cheeks, leaving them soft and peaceful. Down to your neck and shoulders, melting away the last bits of tightness. Your arms grow heavier as the light travels to your hands and fingertips. With each breath, this light continues its gentle journey. Over your chest, bringing warmth and comfort to your heart. Over your ribs, your belly, and your lower back. Every part of you is being bathed in safety and calm. Your body feels soft, heavy, and deeply at ease. The golden light moves to your hips, your thighs. Your legs sinking a little deeper into rest. Your knees, your calves, and down to your ankles. Finally, the light reaches the very tips of your toes. You are glowing gently in warmth and tranquility. Take a moment to simply feel this. The complete stillness of your body. The soft rhythm of your breath. The gentle weight of calm settling over you like a blanket. Now, in your mind, imagine that you are lying on soft grass under a twilight sky. The air is cool and comforting, carrying the faint scent of blooming flowers. Somewhere in the distance, you can hear a small stream trickling over smooth stones. The world is quiet here, safe and endlessly peaceful. You gaze up at the sky above you. It is a deep, velvety blue with the first stars beginning to appear. Each star twinkles gently as if it is greeting you. One by one, more stars appear like a soft sprinkle of diamonds over the night. You feel as if the sky is wrapping you in its soft, infinite embrace. As you watch, a gentle glow appears at the horizon. It is the moon slowly rising to watch over you. Its light is calm and protective, illuminating the grass and the trees around you. You feel completely safe under its glow, as if the night itself is cradling you. The stream nearby continues its lullaby. The grass beneath you feels soft, cool, and perfectly supportive. Every part of this place is here to help you rest. The earth holding you, the sky watching over you, the air carrying the soft whisper of nature's goodnight. You take another long, slow breath and imagine that every exhale carries away a little more of the day. Every exhale leaves you lighter, calmer, and more ready for deep rest. A soft drowsiness begins to settle over you, like a gentle fog drifting in from a quiet lake. It swirls around you, softening every thought and every edge. Until all that's left is comfort, warmth, and stillness. You are drifting now, held by the earth. Cradled by the sky, safe under the watch of the moon and stars. And with every breath, sleep comes closer. Your body knows what to do. It remembers how to rest, how to dream, how to let go. You are already floating toward a night of peaceful, restorative sleep. In this quiet moment, give yourself permission to surrender, to let the world fade away, and to drift into the soft, inviting arms of your dreams. Good night. Rest deeply and enjoy tonight's bedtime story. I didn't reopen the tea shop to sell tea. I reopened it to have somewhere for my hands to go when memory came looking for them. The morning I unlocked the front door again, the bell above it gave a shy, uncertain ring, like it had forgotten how to greet anyone. Dust floated in the angled light, soft as lint. I could still hear my grandmother's laugh in the old wood. Some days it echoes, some days it hides. But that morning, it found me in the hinge sigh of the door and the quiet warmth cupped between the rafters. I stood with my keys in the lock a beat too long, palms damp, as if the shop might change its mind about letting me in. It smelled like lemon oil and black tea. It smelled like her. I stepped inside and ran a hand along the counter she'd rubbed to a shine over decades. There were faint marks from teacups, rings darkened into the grain, like small moons repeating their phases. In the corner, the chalkboard menu waited, ghost writing looping through names I could recite in my sleep. Grandma's Jasmine, Market Oolong, Harbor Smoke. I'd spent weeks scrubbing, painting, mending, my hesitation braided into the tasks. When the anxiety curled too tight and stung, I charged it with small, certain things. Replace a hinge, sort the tins, wash every cup until their faces were familiar again. I'll admit it, part of me hoped reopening would be a fumble that no one noticed. I feared the opposite of a grand opening, a quiet one that proved I'd misread the town's heartbeat. Grief makes your self-confidence prosthetic. It fits, it helps you move, but you always feel where the edges rub. That morning, before I could step fully inside, I saw it. A small parcel by the door, wrapped in a worn linen napkin the color of faded bone. Someone had tucked it right against the threshold, as if it wanted to be the first to enter with me. I bent, picked it up, and felt the cool weight of porcelain beneath the cloth. Inside, a teacup lay like a small moon in a sling of cloud. Even chipped, it was beautiful. White porcelain with climbing blue vines, the exact shade of stormlight. A hairline crack running like a river just below the lip. A note sat beneath it, square and simple, written in a hand that looked like it had learned carefulness from a good teacher. Every cup holds a story. Maybe someone else needs this one now. I traced the crack with my thumb. My grandmother used to say that the finest tea finds the hairline fractures in you and warms them until they widen into doors. She'd been a poet when she wasn't trying to be. I smiled into the empty shop, and it felt like she smiled back, pleased by this small mystery at the door. By noon, the kettle was singing its old song, and I'd turned a corner of the front counter into a tiny museum of sorts. The teacup exchange, the sign read in chalk, maybe sloppy, maybe brave. Take a cup, leave one in return. A little shelf, a frame stand, and a fat jar of paper tags and twine sat ready. I'd written a note beneath. Tell us where it's been or where it wants to go. I set the chipped porcelain as the first artifact, center stage. The crack looked like a road on a map. I imagined a traveler with wind in their hair, a kitchen with afternoon sun, a stack of unpaid bills shielded by a saucer. Who knew what this cup had seen? I tied a tag to its handle and wrote simply, "Found at the door. Waiting." When I turned the sign on the front window to open, my stomach dipped as if the floor had just moved. It was quiet at first, as quiet as a held breath. I wiped the countertop, then wiped it again. I organized the tins alphabetically, then by leaf color, then by mood. The kettle murmured, a small reassurance. Outside, a couple walked by with a terrier, then an old man on a bicycle who didn't see me because he was smiling at a crow balanced on a telephone line. I made myself a pot of dragon well and poured it into one of the thick white mugs my grandmother favored, the ones that forgave you when you bumped them. The first sip loosened something clenched behind my ribs. At 12:17, the bell decided to remember how to be merry. A woman in a paint-splattered denim jacket stepped in, pulled by the smell or the memory it carried. "You're open," she said, and then, "Oh." Her eyes moved around the room as if greeting old neighbors. "Your grandmother used to trade chamomile for my kids' rock collection." "That sounds like her," I said. "We reopened this morning." She read the sign, came to the counter, and put both hands on it. "The teacup exchange," she read aloud, like she was tasting every word. God, I love this town. I poured her a cup of the house blend, told her it was on the house being the tea shop, but also my grandmother, but also everything that housed me in that moment. She leaned on one elbow and told me she was a muralist, that she'd painted the fish that swim along the brick wall on Maple Street. Her name was Kira. "I don't have a cup with me," she said, "but I have a question. Ask. What counts?" She nodded toward the sign. "Any teacup, a mug, a chipped bowl. What about a little clay thing I made in 8th grade that looks like a mushroom and a volcano had a kid? If someone drank something warm from it and told someone else a story afterward," I said, surprising myself. "I think it counts." She lifted her cup. "Perfect." Then she pointed with her chin at the cracked porcelain. "What's this one's story?" "Waiting to be told," I said. "It came with a note, no name. Like a message in a bottle, only it's porcelain and less likely to give you splinters." Kira grinned. "I'll be back." That was how it began. not with a flood, but with a trickle that knew where it was going. By the time afternoon stained the floorboards amber, 3 more people had stepped in. Mr. Campbell from the hardware store brought me a bag of coarse salt as a good luck for floors and bad energy, then bought 2 ounces of lapsang and ordered me to drink water with it. A teenage boy looked at the teas as if they were exotic cars, hands buried deep in his hoodie pocket. He asked if there was anything that helped with stage fright and left with a brown paper bag that rustled with lemon balm and hope. A retired math teacher named Mrs. Dorsey, who insisted on the Mrs. as if she were still taking attendance, declared that she had never liked oolong and then changed her mind after 1 sip. But around 2:30, a man walked in carrying a cardboard box like a birthday cake. He was younger than me by a few years, freckles scattered across his nose like careless punctuation. He set the box on the counter as if it were a sleeping cat, and lifted its lid to show 6 mismatched teacups cupped in tissue paper. "My grandmother passed this spring," he said. "She left these behind. I've been waiting to feel like I knew what to do." I felt it like a tuning fork. "I'm sorry," he nodded. "Me too." He gave a short laugh. "When I was little, she'd make me tea and tell me that a teacup was a small boat for crossing over into better moods." "That sounds like a very good boat." He smiled, the freckles cresting. "I saw your sign. I wasn't sure if I would, and then I did." He pulled 1 cup from the tissue, a delicate thing with violets around the lip, and turned it in his hand. "Can I leave all 6, or is that greedy?" "Greedy?" I said. "You're about to become a patron saint." He wrote on the little paper tags with a firmness that made the letters stand like people who'd decided not to sit down. "This one," he said, tying a tag to the violet cup, "was for when she let me stay up late. She'd fill it with weak tea and sugar and say, 'Don't tell your mother.'" On another tag, tied to a sturdier mug with nautical stripes, "For when the mail brought difficult news." The third, a floral cup with a curvy golden handle, "For the day I told her I got into nursing school." We arranged all 6 on the little shelf with reverence neither of us had to name. He touched the cracked cup with 2 fingers. "This one," he said, reading the note, "wants to go somewhere good." "It does," I said. "So do we." When he left, I wrote something on my own tag and tied it to the cracked porcelain. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was the door parcel's quiet challenge. Maybe it was the way my grandmother's laugh had hung around all morning like a shawl I could trail my fingers along. I wrote, "For the first cup I brew for someone who tells me the truth." Then I tucked the cup like a precious thing among the others and waited for the bell to speak. It wasn't a grand plan. It was a game to coax my courage into the room. A rush came just after 3. Word had found feet. Half the town pretended they'd just happened to be walking by. A woman in scrubs, hair in a bun that meant business, ordered a milky black tea, and used 2 sugars like a soldier uses ammunition. An elderly man with a cane limped to the shelf and held a cup up to the light, as if testing the glaze for honesty. 2 teenage girls dressed like thrift store angels shared a pot of Earl Grey and whispered in the corner, faces bright with some secret that would either become legend or dissolve by next Tuesday. People read the tags and smiled. For the afternoon I decided to forgive her. My first apartment, drafty and perfect, to celebrate the plant that finally grew. Some customers left cups, a stout mug hand-painted with a child's palmy sun and 7 stick people, a delicate glass cup with pink-tinted edges like a morning mouth, a chipped blue and white bowl that had once belonged to someone who insisted soup could be tea if you were stubborn enough. They left notes, too, and in the leaving you could feel something easing. It made a sound that only the floorboards heard. I brewed and rinsed and wiped and tied tags with twine until the muscle between my thumb and palm sang. Somewhere between steeping a pot of sencha and scooping a spoonful of honey for a horse trainer whose shoulders had the nobility of carved statues, I realized that people were not just exchanging cups. They were exchanging the right to have a story held somewhere safe. A young man who couldn't quite look me in the eye asked for peppermint because he hadn't slept in days. When I asked how he took it, he said, quietly. I put a cup in front of him, and he held it with both hands, thumbs pressed to the bead of the rim like he was counting himself back from somewhere. He didn't drink for a while. He just breathed the steam, as if inhaling what he needed was allowed. A woman about my age, peaches on her dress, approached the shelf and hovered by the crack-lipped cup. "What's the story with this one?" she asked, pointing. "It's waiting," I said. Like most good things. She studied it, then me, and then the jar of tags. "What's the truth someone has to tell you?" she asked, nodding toward the tag I'd tied there. I shook my head. "I don't get to choose. They do." She nodded, half smiled, and took the peachiest smelling tea I had, which happened to be white with osmanthus blossoms. She wrote on a tag of her own and tied it to a small white mug with a hairline crack near the base. When she left, I read it. For the morning, I admitted what I want is more than I was told to want. I set her mug beside the cracked cup and fought the chill that rose in me at the thought that the person, whoever they were, might be brave enough to tell me their truth, and that I would have to be brave back. The bell kept its rhythm, a heartbeat on a hinge. Kira returned in the late afternoon with a mushroom volcano of a clay cup that looked like it had been formed by laughter and sincerity. "It is both ugly and perfect," she said, setting it on the shelf. "It is," I said, which is another way to define love. She grinned, then lowered her voice. "There's a rumor," she said, holding a finger to her chest as if she could pin the rumor there for a second. that the cracked porcelain showed up on your doorstep this morning. Who left it? If I knew, I said, I'd thank them, or ask them what else I should do with my life. Leave it to mystery, she said, wiggling her painted eyebrows. Mystery's a decent manager. We were still laughing when the door opened again and a woman with a crescent of gray in her dark hair walked in. She wore a scarf the color of deep lake water and moved with the kind of careful speed people use when they're holding themselves together. She glanced at the shelf, eyes catching on the cracked cup, then scanned the room. I recognized her, though only in the way you recognize the people you've seen on hospital benches at midnight or in bakery lines at dawn. She'd been in town long enough to have left her face in the grocery store light. "Welcome," I said, and she met my eyes like someone who decided to stop avoiding sharp tools. She ordered chamomile and sat at the counter, hands closing around the mug like she'd been waiting for the warmth to teach her something. "My name's Lila," she said. "I used to come here with my mother. Your grandmother once told me that tea is just water asking to be believed in." I felt the laugh cut through me. That sounds right. Lila drank, breathed, and watched the crowd move like a tide in a small bay. "I saw your sign," she said. She looked at the shelf again. "I didn't bring a cup. Not today." Her mouth quirked. "But I might have a story." I nodded toward the cracked cup, the tag I'd tied to it like a dare to myself. "I've got one that's waiting." She studied it as if the crack might widen and spill some secret. "It's chipped," she said. "Someone loved it anyway." "That's the rule," I said. "That's the whole rule." She traced the rim of her mug with one finger. "My mother died in February. I have her wedding set. Teacups with daisies, bright enough to hurt your eyes. I keep meaning to give them away because they're a lot. But I can't. I have this stupid superstition that if I let them go, I'll lose more of her handprint in my life." She smiled without letting it take her mouth completely. "I keep thinking about these cups. I keep thinking about my daughter. I don't want the daisy set to become a shrine. I want it to belong to Sundays and messy buns and bad TV. I want my daughter to drink cocoa from them and put them in the dishwasher when I'm not looking and not be struck by lightning." My throat tightened. Maybe the lightning would be the kind that makes you see where things are, not the kind that burns the house down. She nodded. "Maybe." She looked at the cracked cup, then back to me. "So here's my truth if we're doing that." Her voice changed, softened. "I don't know how to be a mother without one." There it was, the step off the shore, the truth that had been baited all day for bravery. I reached for the cracked cup and wrapped my hand around the smooth, cool bowl. It felt like the kind of thing that wants both carefulness and use. I untied the tag and slid the cup across the counter to her, stem and handle catching the light. "Then you can start by taking this," I said. "You can make tea in it tomorrow morning and tell your daughter that this cup arrived at a door and meant something, and now you're telling it where it goes next." Lila's eyes filled, quick and efficient, like she had trained them not to. "You're giving me your first exchange?" "I'm giving you what someone left for us," I said. "If you leave it with a new story when you're ready, we'll put it on the shelf. Or don't. You'll know." I pushed the tag back toward her. "Write what you want on this, or fold it into your pocket unmarked. Some stories prefer the inside of a jacket." She nodded, chewed her lip, and then wrote on the tag in small, neat letters I had to lean to read. "For the morning we'll pour into, even if our hands tremble." She tied it to the handle with a tug that meant, "I mean it." "Do I leave a different cup now?" she asked, half joking. "Take your time," I said. "Some exchanges take a season to complete. Some never do, and they're still exchanges." She slid the cup toward her chest like a secret she'd decided to keep in open air. She paid with a 20 and told me to keep the change, and then hesitated. "Your grandmother taught me how to brew a proper cup of barley tea," she said. "Said it tastes like the smell of summer barns. I burned it the first 3 times, and she never made me feel stupid." "That was her gift," I said, "and also her hobby." We laughed. It made the bell ring again somehow. After she left, Kira whistled low. "You're really doing it," she said. "You're letting things move." "I'm trying to," I said. "I think this is what she'd want." "Your grandmother left you a room full of doorways," Kira said. "Of course you're letting people through." Dusk came down the street like a promise, shadows lengthening into the shape of familiar things. I wiped the counter and set the chairs at angles my grandmother had sworn made people feel welcome. I counted out the till, more out of ritual than necessity, and checked the small shelf again. The violet cup waited for its person. The mushroom volcano sat like a patient pet rock from a planet that valued whim over symmetry. The old daisy set wasn't there yet, but I had a feeling about next Sunday. I made myself a final cup of jasmine and brought it to the front window. The sign glowed in the last light. Tea in graceful script and shop in block letters my grandfather had painted before I was born. The street settled into evening softness. A couple on a bench traded bites of something wrapped in foil. A boy doing lazy wheelies on his bike made even the air grin. Across the way, the pottery studio's windows showed ghostly bowls, all of them future vessels that would find mouths and hands and meanings. When I lifted my cup to drink, the first star punched through the darkening blue, a small hole in the sky through which a secret might have escaped. I think about that chipped porcelain often. How it arrived on a morning when I didn't know if I was allowed to want what I wanted. It sat there with its crack like a line drawn between then and now, and when I crossed it, I found out I could set something in motion with a sign and a shelf and a willingness to be surprised. Maybe that's all a life is. A series of exchanges, some cups we keep, some we pass on, all of us taking turns holding. Before I locked up, I took out a notebook and opened it to the first page. I wrote the teacup exchange at the top and drew 3 small cups below it. One for Lila, one for the freckled man's grandmother, one for the mystery person who left me the door parcel. Beneath, I wrote today's date, then a line, took courage to open, received more back, left space for names and tags and the peculiar ways people phrase their truths when they are brave enough to say them. Tomorrow I'd add a line for whichever cups wandered in, for whichever hands needed something to hold and something to leave behind. I turned the open sign to closed, but out of habit left the lamp in the window on. My grandmother always did that. Someone out there needs to know there's still hot water somewhere in this town, she'd say, flicking the switch, a ritual as holy as any candle lighting. I stood there a moment, palms on the glass, feeling the day cool against my skin. The lamp painted an oval of gold onto the sidewalk, a quiet oath. On my way to the door, I glanced at the shelf one more time. In the middle, where the cracked porcelain had been, there was a small rectangle of folded paper. I hadn't seen anyone slip it there. My pulse did something foolish. I unfolded it. The same careful handwriting. Good beginning. Keep the light on. I smiled until my cheeks ached, and then I laughed so hard I snorted, and then I cried, because that is what a good beginning does. It loosens the valves and lets the water move. I tucked the note into the notebook, between the first page and the cover, where beginnings live. Outside, the last of the light braided itself with the glow from the lamp. Okay, I said out loud to the empty room that felt anything but. Okay. I locked up. The bell gave one last ring, bright and sure, as if it had decided its job with me wasn't done. I stepped onto the sidewalk where my grandmother had taken so many breaths before me, and I took one of my own. Behind me, the window shone like a promise, a lighthouse for anyone walking home with their hands empty and their chest heavy, a reminder that there's a place to set something down and take something else up, a place to pour what trembles and let it settle. People say every cup holds a story. I think the truth is more generous. I think every story finds a cup eventually, something shaped to its mouth, something that warms when held. And in this town, in this tea shop with its stubborn floorboards and its soft-lit jars and its shelf of mismatched vessels, I have decided to be the finder, or at least the keeper until the right hands arrive. Tomorrow I'll open again. The bell will try not to smile. It will fail. Someone will take a cup for waking early. Someone will leave one for a grief that finally learned to yawn and lie down. The exchange will grow like coral, slow and miraculous. And when night falls, I'll leave the lamp on. Someone out there needs to know hot water is waiting. So do I. I learned quickly that pouring tea is just another way to hold a confession without letting it spill. By the second morning, I had a rhythm, but it wasn't mine alone. The bell above the door had shaken off its first day shyness and taken up humming on its hinge. The kettle's thin song threaded the air like a ribbon you could follow with your eyes closed. I moved between tins and cups and the little shelf of our teacup exchange with a care that felt like prayer, and with a clumsiness that felt equally honest. Behind the counter, tucked beneath the till where my grandmother used to keep her peppermint drops, sat a notebook with a linen cover. I had written its title in pencil, small and sure, The Exchange. First Pours. I opened the notebook with the first turn of the key. The tea shop smelled like orange peel and the remembered smoke of yesterday's lapsang. The window fogged slightly from the first pot I brewed for myself, jasmine again, because I wanted to believe that memory could be gentle on command. A shaft of light sifted down through dust like snow drifting the wrong direction. It made even the broom look ceremonious propped in its corner. I'd left the sign as it had been. Take a cup, leave one in return, and added a line beneath in smaller chalk. Tell us a little about it, if you can. The jar of tags sat like a fat invitation, a coil of twine, scissors. The cracked porcelain cup I'd given to Lila the day before left its absence on the shelf like a pressed hand. In its place, alive and waiting, stood the violet cup from the freckled boy's grandmother, Kira's mushroom volcano, still perfect in its wrongness, and 3 newcomers from early birds who'd slipped in before I'd fully found my smile. A stout, cheerful mug painted with strawberries, a small gray stoneware cup with thumb dents that made you hold it like a small animal, and a chipped bowl I was already half in love with for its audacity in calling itself a teacup at all. At 9:05, the bell announced a careful step. An elderly man in a stiff wool coat entered as if the room were a threshold to something he respected. Church, perhaps, or a library with saints who wore sensible shoes. He carried a rectangle wrapped in brown paper. He did not remove his hat. He merely touched the brim in my direction like a gentleman you only meet in memories and certain corners of town. "Morning," he said, voice low, like the first notes of a cello warming up. "Welcome," I said. "What can I pour you?" "A psalm if you don't mind it strong," he said, like a news anchor from the old days. I smiled, reached for the tin, measured out leaves that smelled like toast and earth. As I set the kettle on its second, more serious boil, he laid the package on the counter and undid its twine with fingers that looked both stubborn and tired. I heard about your exchange, he said, as if telling me the weather. My grandson sent me a photo, told me it was every you, which I took to mean I am an old man with a stash of unnecessary objects and a tendency toward sentiment. If that's a crime, I said, you are safe here. He almost smiled. The paper parted. Inside lay a delicate china cup with faint green vines and little gold dots that pretended not to be flowers. The saucer had a hairline crack mended long ago with what looked like a patience I envied. She used it every Sunday, he said, and I knew she before he told me. After church, she would read out loud to me. Not the Bible. She had a mischievous streak about the Sabbath. Poetry. His eyes skimmed the air, catching words I couldn't hear. Mary Oliver. Neruda, but the tame translations. On good Sundays, Keats. On difficult Sundays, whatever she could find that didn't demand too much of our bones. I placed his cup of a psalm in front of him and, without thinking, set an empty saucer beside it, as if memory required a place to sit as well. What was her favorite? She liked ordinary miracles, he said. If a poem had a kitchen in it, or a blade of grass held too tightly between fingers, she'd sigh like the poet had finally said a thing she herself might have said if she'd had a longer ladder inside her. He lifted the cup. Margaret. 49 Sundays out of 50, that cup. He cleared his throat. She died last winter. I kept this because I liked to look at the gold dots and imagine I was doing something holy. You were, I said. His mouth quirked. I wondered. Then I saw your sign. I brought it, thinking, it needs to be used. Cups resent becoming relics. I drew the notebook closer, flipped to a new page, and wrote the date. If you'd like to tell me what to write, I'll tuck it right here. I touched the paper like a tablecloth being smoothed for supper. He rested his hand on the counter and spread his fingers. Liver spots like a small constellation. Write this, he said, speaking slowly, as if placing each word on a shelf. Gift from Plus Margaret Sundays, poems aloud, for anyone who wants a soft astonishment. He paused. And my name, Thomas Crane. I wrote exactly that, the plus sign and all. My pencil made the faint, scratchy sound that feels like proof of being alive. Then we tied a tag to the handle, for Sundays and soft astonishments, and set the china on the exchange shelf. It glowed a little. I swear it did. Mr. Crane finished his assam, watching the little museum, and then put a $10 bill in the tip jar and a peppermint in his mouth with the satisfied guilt of a child. I'll bring another next week, he said. She had two. One was for days when we dared the sonnets. I'll brew stronger if you do, I said, and he tipped his hat again, the bell doing its best impression of applause. Between his leaving and the next rush, I documented him. I printed his words, soft astonishment, and the room shifted around them, making space, as if the phrase were a piece of furniture we'd all been missing without knowing. I drew a tiny cup beside the entry and shaded in its dots with the gentlest pressure because it felt wrong not to. The morning widened. Footsteps and stories found their way inside like wind that had learned courtesy. A man with paint under his nails, not Kira but someone from her tribe, left a heavy stoneware mug that could outlast a storm, for sobering conversations that still end with the last sip sweet. A child no taller than the counter brought in a thimble-sized pink cup from a doll set, for pretend tea that turned real when Mom was tired. A librarian from 2 towns over traded a chipped white mug ringed with names of extinct birds, for remembering things we taught ourselves to forget. I poured and listened. I listened more than I poured. Around 11, she arrived, young, with hair pulled into a knot that pretended not to care how pretty it was. She wore a hoodie the color of fog and carried a cardboard box with a butcher's twine bow like she'd convinced herself it was a gift if packaged so. Her eyes darted to the shelf, to me, to the notebook I kept touching as if it were a pet. She set the box on the counter and opened it. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, sat a mug painted with stars. Not precise constellations. A scatter of bright dots with trailing comet tails. A moon that couldn't decide which phase it wanted to be. A cluster of tiny white specks like chalk dust on a good blackboard. It looked hand-painted, earnest, imperfect, brimming with hope. I used it for study nights, she said, half laughing, half apologizing, and panic nights. And the nights when I thought the word future was a door someone had locked by accident and lost the key under a couch. She smoothed the tissue edges. College, she added, as if the word explained everything and nothing at once. Congratulations, I said. I graduated 3 years ago, she said. Still keeps showing up in my dreams, though. A stack of flashcards shaped like a mountain. A professor who wants me to explain the mitochondria of my feelings. She smiled with her eyes like someone peering from a window at a storm that's finally moved on. My name's Aaliyah. I set a pot to steep. Peppermint and lemon balm, the kind of steam that forgives, and brought her closer to the shelf. What did the stars help you through? I asked. Statistics, she said, mock solemn, and chemistry, and heartbreak because Gomez dumped me in the middle of finals, and I somehow believed academic probation and romantic grief were cousins. She traced the rim with one finger. But mostly the feeling that I had to know everything before I tried anything. I opened the notebook to a fresh page. The pencil felt warm between my fingers, like a thing that had been waiting in a pocket. Tell me how to write it. She watched the mug for a long breath, as if the stars might rearrange into a more legible sky. Write this, she said at last. for midnight attempts that didn't need to be perfect to count. She hesitated, then added, past the class, also past the worst version of myself. Her smile earned itself. And you can put my name, Aaliyah S. I wrote that too. I wrote it like a cheering section. Then I tied a tag to the handle and, because it felt right, a second tag to the loop of twine she'd brought around the box. Past plus preceded. I placed the mug on the shelf next to Mr. Crane's sundaes. The stars looked like they recognized the gold dots and bowed a little. Tea? I offered. On the house with a side of future. Do you have the kind that pretends caffeine isn't a personality trait? She asked. House green, I said. It's gentle and decisive at the same time. She laughed softly. Like your sign. We stood, both of us, like people who had chosen to stay inside a story for a minute longer than necessary. Then the bell chimed, and she took her cup to a corner table and opened a book. Not a textbook. A novel so wrinkled it had become soft. And maybe that was the real miracle, that the pages cooperated after everything. I documented her too. I wrote stars, midnight attempts, and drew a tiny comet tail I then tried to erase, failed, and decided to love crooked. When I looked up, the room had thickened with bodies. A father and his small son, who climbed onto a chair and pointed with 2 fingers at the shelf as if guiding a plane into a gate. 2 retired nurses in matching padded sneakers arguing amiably over which tea could be steeped twice without losing its soul. The high school chemistry teacher, who always smelled faintly of chalk and lavender, left a white enamel mug with a chip shaped like Michigan. For lab partners who became actual partners, except then you realized one of you loved lab more. Each time someone brought a cup, I reached for my notebook. I wrote without telling myself to hurry, and the day arranged itself around the pencil's steady scratch. People started to understand. This wasn't only a place to set down and pick up porcelain. It was a ledger of tenderness, a record that would be as mismatched and luminous as the shelf itself. They lined up to pay for their tea, and then they leaned in to tell me how to phrase what their cup had meant. Some stories arrived whole, like birds alighting on the sill. Others came in fragments that required me to gently ask, "What if we write it this way?" and watch relief settle in their shoulders when the words finally sat down. Around midday, Kira arrived with wet paint on her knuckles, which she blew on as if they were candles, and she intended to make very specific wishes. She had a new cup in her tote, a galley mug stolen from a boat, dented, scratched, unapologetic. "From my uncle," she said, tapping its side. "For when a thing has survived and plans to again." We wrote that down. For surviving twice. It was important to be precise. "Your notebook," she said, nodding toward it as I scribbled. "You're writing a book and tricking us into thinking we're the authors." "I'm writing a phone book of souls," I said before I could help myself. And then I blushed because that sounded like something my grandmother would say in her most mischievous mood. Kira laughed. Charge admission when you release it, or barter for good umbrellas and alleyway murals. The afternoon moved like a train you can walk the length of while it's still moving. I poured henmecha and honeybush and a Darjeeling so fragrant that a couple didn't speak for 3 whole minutes after the first sip. They just grinned at each other like they'd gotten away with a heist. Someone took Mr. Crane's cup to a table by the window and read quietly, lips moving around the poems as if trying on a new pair of shoes. I watched him, 30, maybe, freckles, a knit cap new enough to still have ambition, turn a page with reverence. When he brought the cup back, he stroked the gold dots with one finger. I'll bring that back next Sunday, he whispered, as if the cup needed sleep between poems. You can keep it if it insists, I said, and he looked almost frightened by the permission and then grateful in a way that made me want to polish the counter so hard it gleamed. Lila came by late afternoon, the cracked porcelain cradled in both hands. It made the tea taste like courage, she said, eyes bright. My daughter and I read the tag out loud and then wrote our own on an index card and put it on the fridge. I'm not leaving the cup, not yet, she smiled. But I brought one of the daisies. Just one. She held out a cup so loud with its brightness I had to squint to meet it. Daisies climbing, gold centers, the glaze a little too glossy, the kind of cheer that feels like an ant insisting on seconds. I was ready, Lila said. I want that girl to know that dishes are not altars, they're tools. She drank hot chocolate from it and licked the rim, and it was perfect. We tied an indecently sentimental tag. For cocoa that forgives the mess. I wrote that down too, and drew a smudge that could have been chocolate or penance. Somewhere in there, a man with a tired face and immaculate shoes set a small, heavy espresso cup on the shelf. It's not tea, he said, almost apologetic. Cups are omnivorous, I said. He exhaled, relieved, and told me it had lived on his desk through a divorce and 2 promotions, and that it now deserved to see daylight. For the hours between 2 and 4, he dictated, when a person must decide if they're braver or simply too tired not to be. I brewed him oolong with a twist of orange peel and didn't charge him. Some things you pay in advance for with your whole life. When the rush thinned, I allowed myself to sit for exactly 6 minutes at the stool behind the counter. The notebook was heavier than it had been that morning. If a burglar had come in demanding the till, I would have handed it over and hidden the notebook under the teapot. The pages held Mr. Crane's Sundays, Aaliyah's stars, Kira's surviving twice, Lila's cocoa forgiveness, and a dozen other entries that made the air itself feel seasoned. I ran my fingers down the lists and felt something like a city map rise beneath my fingertips. Intersections of grief and joy, avenues of habit, cul-de-sacs of affection where people parked and watched the light change. I thought of my grandmother. She had kept ledgers, practical ones, ounces sold, vendors paid, tips saved in a jar for December. But she also kept something else invisible and meticulous, a mental catalog of what her people needed. Not only the customers, but the plants, the paint on the door frame, the stray cat who never committed to us fully, but liked to nap under the radiator at the back. The exchange was a physical version of that invisible catalog. It felt like writing down the names of stars you could see when the town's streetlights cooperated. Jade? Aaliyah's voice, timid at the edge of the counter. She held her star mug with both hands, steam-wreathed. Could I read you something? Always, I said, and meant it. She took a breath, like a swimmer checking the water. It's not long. Her voice softened into the cadence that comes when someone reads the words they wrote without expecting anyone to ever hear them. Last night, she read from her phone, I realized the worst thing I believed in college was that I had to earn rest. Today I am drinking tea in a room where rest sits in a cup and says, "Start again when you're ready." She looked up, embarrassed. It's a note to myself. I keep notes in my phone like a squirrel hides food it can't trust itself with. It's beautiful, I said, because sometimes the word is accurate and not lazy. May I put the gist of that, about rest, in the notebook next to your entry? She nodded, and then she smiled like the version of herself who survived finals had finally made it home and hung up her coat. As the day slid toward late afternoon, a different kind of silence arrived. The kind that lives under laughter like a calm cellar under a dancing house. I noticed it whenever someone reached toward the shelf and paused, reading tags, choosing a handle. They were picking more than a cup. They were selecting a little tunnel into someone else's life, borrowing a lantern to walk through it. Some returned cups within the hour, newly rinsed. A story added to the tag in smaller script. Drank this while texting my sister we're okay. Held this while I wrote the first sentence I didn't hate. Read this exact Neruda line. I love you as certain dark things are to be loved, in secret between the shadow and the soul. Mr. Crane would have been smug about that line. He would have pretended not to be. The last rush felt like a tide that wasn't in a hurry to leave. The town has a way of making time bend a little when the light hits right. People lingered, trading seats, swapping mugs, pointing out a tag to a stranger like they were recommending a dessert at a restaurant they wanted you to fall in love with so it wouldn't close. At one point, 5 cups stood on the counter in a row, each with a different steam signature, and I thought, without meaning to, that I was conducting an orchestra made of warmth. A man in his 20s hovered near the till. He had the look of someone rehearsing a question. Finally, he said, "What if someone doesn't have a cup to bring?" "Then someone else did," I said, "and they're happy for you to borrow the history for a while." "Do people really not steal them?" He looked genuinely curious, not cynical. "They might," I said, "and if they need to, then they need to. But the whole thing is a bet against the worst assumption you can make about people." He thought about that and nodded, as if the math checked out. He chose the daisy cup, Lila's bravery disguised as cheer, and tipped $1 into the jar with a studied casualness that made my chest ache. He sat with it by the window, sunlight punching through the petals, and took a photo. I pretended not to see him send it to someone quickly, like throwing a rope and hoping it landed. The sun tilted. The jars along the wall kept their jewel tones as if the light coming through them were flavored. When I finally turned the sign to closed, there were still 2 customers finishing the last of their cups, quiet as birds at dusk. I wiped the counter with the good cloth, my grandmother's. It had a constellation of tiny bleached-out stars from years of lemon and hot water applied with fabulous optimism. And then I sat and opened the notebook again. I read through the day as if it were someone else's book and I had stumbled on it in a thrift store, margin noted by a stranger with excellent penmanship. I had written, "Thomas Crane, Sundays, soft astonishments." I had written, "Aaliyah S., stars, midnight attempts." I had written, "Lila, Cocoa forgiveness, Daisy bright." I had written so many names that the page had begun to look like a town directory of the heartbeat. Between entries I added small sketches, the arc of a handle, a dot pattern, the little crater at the bottom of a mug where the glaze pooled and forgot to smooth itself. The sketch of the cracked porcelain left with Lila was there too, a line that had learned to carry its own weight. I thought I was done when I found one more tag wedged at the bottom of the jar. The handwriting was careful, almost my grandmother's, but less certain. The tag read, "For Tuesdays, when you must begin again, though it is not dramatic to do so. No name, just the little declaration and the twine's memory of a knot." I looked around as if the author might still be here, hiding behind the radiator with the stray cat's ghost. No one. Still, the tag had a gravity to it. I copied it into the notebook, underlined "not dramatic," circled "begin again." And because I am me, and because it has always felt right to talk to an empty room that refuses to stay empty for long, I said aloud, "Okay, we'll keep this going. We'll begin again tomorrow." On my way to the door, I stopped by the shelf. Mr. Crane's cup remained, patient. Aaliyah's star mug shone as if someone had polished it with their sleeve alone. The daisy cup had not returned, and it didn't need to. Kira's boat mug stood like a boxer in its corner, ready for round 3. The mushroom volcano was so ugly it had looped back into endearing, and I wanted absurdly to kiss it for its effort. I set one more cup on the shelf, my own, finally. A thick white mug with a hairline chip near the foot. My grandmother's everyday cup. I hadn't been ready in the morning. I was now. I tied a tag. For the hours between open and closed, when you remember to trust, then forget, then remember again. I didn't put a name. The mug would already recognize mine in the way I held it. Before I flipped the lamp in the window, I slid a peppermint from the jar, the way Mr. Crane had, and unwrapped it. The snap between my teeth woke a memory. My grandmother pressing one into my palm when I was 5 and furious at a broken toy, saying, "The mouth is often the easiest place to comfort." I wasn't sure if that was wisdom or an excuse to give a child sugar, but either way, it worked. The bell rang once more, a friend saying good night and meaning it. I stepped into the dimming street, locked the door, and stood a moment with my palm pressed to the glass. Inside, the exchange waited. Tags and twine, cups and stories. My notebook half filled, the kettle cooling with the quiet dignity of a candle that has done its job. Outside, the town walked home carrying paper bags and arguments wrapped carefully to be resumed upstairs. The sky had sprinkled itself with a few early stars, and I thought of Aaliyah's mug and all the attempts that counted even when they weren't perfect. I didn't reopen the tea shop to sell tea. I reopened it so I could be the person who says, "Tell me," and then listens like it's a job. The exchange wasn't a gimmick, it was a grammar. It taught us how to speak in cups and receive in sips. It taught me that the first pour isn't only liquid, it's trust. And the second pour is the story that arrives because the first one landed softly. Tomorrow the bell will practice being joyful again and succeed. Mr. Crane will return with the sonnet cup and chew his peppermint like a plot twist. A student will bring a mug with a crack that looks like a coastline and ask if it still counts. And I'll say, especially. Someone will borrow the daisy and drop chocolate on the rim and feel miraculously unpunished. Kira will paint stars in the alley and then come in smelling like turpentine and happiness. I'll write until my wrist aches, then I'll write more. And somewhere, an anonymous hand will leave a cup wrapped in linen, or a tag with handwriting that does not recognize itself yet. And I will hold it up to the light, and I will say aloud to the room, "Good beginning. Keep the light on." Some cups don't just sit on the shelf. They look back. It was a Tuesday, one of those soft weather mornings when the air feels like it's been washed in chamomile. I'd been restocking the exchange shelf, adjusting the cups so their handles angled just so. My grandmother always said a cup should look like it's offering its hand, not hiding it. When I saw it, I swear it hadn't been there the day before. A teacup, small bowled and fine-boned porcelain, painted with clusters of bluebells so delicate it felt like they might sway if I breathed too close. The flowers curled up the side in pale periwinkle strokes, each one tipped with a whisper of lavender, their stems green as early spring. The gold trim caught the light like a slow wink, not flashy, but enough to make you aware that someone had cared enough to gild it. I leaned in, the way you do when something asks you to. Inside the cup was a folded slip of paper, so small it could have been overlooked by someone not already in the habit of searching for stories. My fingers hesitated, then plucked it out. The handwriting was neat, a little slanted, as if the writer had been patient but not leisurely. For when you're trying to forgive yourself. I read it again, and again. And once more for the part of me that didn't want to admit why it made my throat close. I'd catalogued dozens of cups by now, ones for joy, for grief, for transitions. But this note felt different. It didn't make a request or celebrate an occasion. It didn't name a person, place, or date. It named a state of being and not an easy one. Forgive yourself. The words sat there in my palm, heavier than porcelain. I thought of my grandmother's garden, how she'd coaxed bluebells along the west fence, claiming they were flowers that thrived best when left a little to themselves, and how, in the last summer before she passed, my sister and I had stood between those same flowers, our voices so sharp they seemed to bend the stems. I hadn't written to my sister since. I set the cup on the counter, meaning to tag it, log it in the notebook, place it neatly on the shelf. But every time I tried, I caught myself holding it too long, turning it so the bluebells faced me. I told myself I was just appreciating the craftsmanship. By the end of the day, it was still on the counter. Customers had admired it, even picked it up. But each time I'd find a reason to steer them toward something else. That one's a sturdier pour, or you might like this handle better. I was hoarding it, and I knew it. When I locked up that night, the bluebell cup was in my bag. At home, I washed it slowly, as if it had been holding dust from a century ago. My apartment smelled faintly of cardamom from the tea I'd brewed before leaving that morning. I made another pot, a psalm with a splash of milk, the way my grandmother used to drink hers in the last hour before bed, and poured it into the bluebell cup. The gold trim warmed against my lip. I drank it on the couch, lights dimmed, the quiet stretching long enough for my mind to wander where I'd been avoiding. The fight with my sister had been quick, stupid, and volcanic. Words about money and decisions and who should have been where, when. We'd both said the kind of things that stay in the room long after you leave it. I'd replayed that day so often it felt like a stone I kept turning in my palm. Familiar, smooth, but still capable of bruising me. The tea was gone before I realized I'd been holding the note in my other hand the whole time. That night, I dreamed. I was walking through my grandmother's garden at dusk. The bluebells were in full bloom, the air damp with the smell of earth and lilac. My grandmother knelt in the dirt, wearing her wide straw hat, her hands deep in soil. She didn't look up when she spoke. "Some flowers you tend every day," she said. "Some you step back from, let them find their own way." I wanted to ask which kind my sister and I were, but the words didn't come. She straightened, brushed soil from her gloves, and handed me a small trowel. "The trick," she said, "is knowing the difference without keeping score." When I woke, there was a strange stillness in the room, as if the dream had followed me out of sleep and was sitting quietly in the corner. The bluebell cup was on my nightstand, empty, the note tucked inside like a seed, and I wanted, no, needed to write. I hadn't written my sister a letter in 5 years. Texts, sure. Occasional clipped emails about logistics, yes. But not a real letter, not ink on paper, not the kind of thing that admits you've been thinking longer than you meant to. I dug through my desk drawer until I found a stack of stationery my grandmother had given me for my 21st birthday. Cream paper, faintly lined, the edges embossed with a tiny floral border. Bluebells, I realized, my breath catching. I'd forgotten that detail. I sat at the kitchen table, the early light barely pushing through the blinds, and wrote. Not an apology for the sake of ending the fight, but an admission that I had been stubborn, that I'd measured her mistakes more generously than my own, that I'd been scared of what mending would require of me. I told her I missed her laugh, the way it started in her chest before she even smiled. I told her about the exchange, the cups, the stories, how the town was pouring itself into porcelain, and I told her about the bluebell cup and the note it carried. "When you're trying to forgive yourself," I wrote, "it helps to remember that someone else might be trying to do the same thing at the same time." By the time I signed my name, the sun was up. The letter sat in the center of the table, like it was waiting for courage to seal the envelope. Back at the shop, I logged the bluebell cup in the notebook, but I didn't put it on the shelf. Not yet. It stayed behind the counter where I could see it every time I rang someone up. Customers noticed. "That one's yours?" Mrs. Dorsey asked, tilting her head toward it. "For now," I said. She didn't press, just nodded like she understood there are some cups you keep close until you're ready to let them out into the world again. In the days that followed, I kept seeing small shifts in the people who came through the door. Mr. Crane brought the Sonic cup and told me he'd started reading poetry aloud to his granddaughter. Aaliyah came in with a smile so wide it startled me. She'd landed a new job, one she'd been too afraid to apply for until now. Kira painted a tiny bluebell on the mushroom volcano mug, just because it needed a little forgiveness too. And one afternoon, as I poured a pot of chamomile for a tired mother with a newborn strapped to her chest, I realized the exchange was doing for others what the Bluebell cup was doing for me. It wasn't just about the giving or the taking. It was about the pause in between, the moment you hold the handle and consider what it has carried. I mailed the letter on a Thursday. No text to warn her. No return address beyond my name. Just the paper, folded into the matching envelope. A small Bluebell stamp pressed into the corner. That night I drank from the cup again, and when I set it down I didn't feel the same weight pressing at me. Not gone, but shifted. Forgiving yourself, I thought, might be less about closing a door and more about planting something on either side of it. I haven't decided when I'll put the Bluebell cup back on the shelf. Maybe I'll wait until I hear from her. Maybe I'll wait until I dream of the garden again. But I know this. It will go back, and when it does, the tag will read. For when you're learning that forgiveness grows best in the open air, and maybe, just maybe, someone else will pick it up, carry it home, and find it looking back at them. Some cups come to you like strangers. Some come back like they never left. It was mid-afternoon on a Thursday, the kind of hour when the shop usually sighed into a lull. The kettle had just finished its slow boil. The bell above the door had been quiet for 10 minutes, and I was sketching the Bluebell cup in the exchange notebook, shading its petals like I could keep them from fading. That's when the bell gave a sharp, bright ring, an eager note, not the lazy sway of regulars who knew they had all the time in the world. In stepped a teenager, hood up, cheeks pink from the cold, a cardboard box tucked under one arm. He looked around as if making sure the place matched whatever description had led him here. His eyes landed on the shelf of mismatched cups, and something in his shoulders shifted, like he'd found what he'd been aiming for. "You're Jade?" he asked. "I am," I said, wiping my hands on my apron. "Welcome to the teacup exchange." He set the box gently on the counter. "I think this belongs to you." I smiled politely, the way you do when people hand you a mug they think is special because it's chipped in just the right way. But when I opened the box, my breath caught. Nestled inside a tangle of brown paper was a cup I hadn't seen in over a decade. White porcelain, smooth as a stone, with a thin green vine circling the rim and curling down into 3 painted strawberries. The glaze had hairline cracks spidering from the base of the handle, just as I remembered, and one of the strawberries still had the faint smudge from the time I'd set it down on a windowsill with berry juice on my fingers. I hadn't thought of it in years, but as soon as I saw it, I was 9 again, sitting at my grandmother's kitchen table, cradling that cup with both hands because it was special and only for the best tea. She'd let me drink weak peppermint with too much honey, the steam curling around her voice as she told me that strawberries were tiny containers of summer. How? I started, then stopped. Where did you find this? He dug in his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded slip of paper. It was in the cup, he said. I unfolded it. The handwriting was unfamiliar, slanted, quick, but the words were steady. Found this at a flea market. Thought it belonged somewhere warm. I traced the rim with my thumb, the glaze warm from his walk here. This was ours, I said. My grandmother's. I don't even know how it left. Guess it wanted to come back, he said, smiling in a way that was more eyes than mouth. A flash of memory surfaced. The yard sale after my grandmother's passing. Tables lined with teacups I'd been too numb to sort through properly. The strawberry cup must have been sold for $1, maybe less. I'd told myself cups were just cups, that the memories stayed even if the objects didn't. But seeing it now, I knew that wasn't entirely true. Some memories like to ride back in on the things that carried them. I looked up at the boy. What's your name? Eli. Well, Eli, I said, you've just brought something home. I didn't even hesitate. I cleared a space in the center of the exchange shelf, right where the light from the front window pooled in a soft square, and placed the strawberry cup there. I tied a tag to its handle and after a moment's thought wrote in careful script, "Some cups return when you're ready." Underneath in smaller letters, "Strawberries are tiny containers of summer." When I stepped back, the cup seemed to belong to that spot the way certain people belong to a kitchen, moving through it like they've always known where everything lives. Eli lingered, reading other tags, sipping the tea I insisted on pouring him. House blend, trust me. And I caught him smiling at the mismatched little family on the shelf. Before he left, he touched the strawberry cup lightly with 2 fingers, as if making sure it wasn't going to vanish again. The return of that cup did something to the shop. Word spread faster than I expected. Regulars came in asking to see it. People who'd never set foot in the place wandered in with the kind of curiosity you bring to a rumor. "Which one is it?" they'd whisper, like we were holding a celebrity in China form. Mrs. Dorsey brought her bridge club in for a pot of Darjeeling and positioned their table so they could keep an eye on the prodigal cup. Kira sketched it in her notebook during a rainy afternoon and left the drawing taped to the side of the display with the words, "Every return has its season." Even visitors from out of town started to appear. Tourists who'd read about the tea shop where lost cups come back. They'd browse the shelf like it was a gallery, murmuring over the tags, buying tea not just to drink but to linger in the atmosphere that had grown thicker, warmer. I started to notice something else. People were bringing cups with a different kind of story now. Not just cups they loved and were ready to pass on, but cups that had been lost, found and carried back here like offerings. A woman brought in a chipped mug with a faded picture of a tabby cat. My brother left it on a park bench 3 years ago, she said, and someone gave it back to me last month. Figured it should live here until the next person needs it. A man arrived with a heavy diner mug, the kind that could survive a fall from a moving truck. Found it in the back of a cupboard at work, he said. We all thought it belonged to someone else, and when nobody claimed it, I figured maybe it belonged to someone here. Every time one of those cups landed on the shelf, I added a small gold dot to its tag, a silent symbol for the ones that came back. Soon there were more gold dots than I'd expected. The strawberry cup stayed put for weeks. I didn't use it. I couldn't yet. But I did dust it every morning, turning it slightly so the light hit the glaze differently. People began leaving little folded notes inside, like coins in a wishing well. Some were simple, thinking of my dad today. Others more detailed. We argued for years. He knocked on my door yesterday. I never read them unless they were left open, but I could feel the weight of them adding to the cup's quiet gravity. One morning I found a single fresh strawberry in it. No note, just the fruit, bright and unbruised. I set it on the counter beside my kettle and ate it after the morning rush, letting the sweetness coat my tongue like a benediction. And somewhere in the middle of all this, I realized the exchange had shifted again. It was no longer just a shelf of stories. It was a place where things and people circled back when the time was right. I saw it in the way regulars lingered after finishing their tea, watching the door as if half expecting someone they hadn't seen in years to walk in. I heard it in the way people spoke about the cups, not in the past tense, but in the language of return. "You think my mother's mug will make it here someday?" a customer asked me once. "Stranger things have happened," I said, glancing at the strawberry cup. One rainy afternoon, Lila came in, the cracked porcelain cup she'd taken weeks ago tucked in her bag. "I think it's ready to come back," she said, setting it gently on the counter. "I used it every morning for tea with my daughter. We read together. We talked about my mom. It feels full now." I tied a gold-dotted tag to it before placing it next to the strawberry cup. She noticed the dots. "Those are for the returns?" she asked. "Yeah," she smiled. "Feels right to be in that company." Even I wasn't immune to the pull. One quiet night after closing, I finally took the strawberry cup home. I brewed peppermint tea the way my grandmother used to make it, barely steeped, drowning in honey, and carried it to the couch. I held it in both hands, not just for warmth, but for the way it anchored me. It didn't erase the years that had been gone, or the version of me who'd let it go. But it made those years feel less like an absence and more like a season, one that had ended, making room for the return. I thought of Eli, of the stranger who'd bought it at the flea market. of all the hands this cup had passed through before finding its way back. And I realized maybe that's what healing was. Not a perfect restoration, but a journey through many hands, many places, until the moment you could hold it again without flinching. The next morning I brought it back to the shop. I set it in its place at the center of the shelf, the tag still tied to its handle. People smiled when they saw it. Some paused, read the words again, and nodded to themselves before moving on. The bell rang steadily all day. Locals, tourists, the curious and the lonely, all of them stepping into the warm air scented with jasmine, honey, and stories. And I thought, this is it. This is what I opened the shop for. Not just tea, not just cups, but the quiet, almost invisible work of giving things a place to return to. Because some cups come to you like strangers. Some come back like they never left. And when they do, you keep the light on. I didn't plan on crying over a teapot, but the minute I lifted the lid and the room breathed in, I knew I was done for. Teacup telling night began the way the best rituals do, with a hush that wasn't empty. The shop glowed like it had been practicing all afternoon. Candles in jam jars along the windowsill, strings of tiny bulbs tucked into the high shelf above the tins, chairs angled so knees might touch and stories might pass without falling. Kira's mural sketch of the strawberry cup hung near the exchange display. Blue painter's tape at each corner like a promise to make it permanent later. In the center of the room I'd arranged 4 small tables into one long communal table. My grandmother never liked long tables. She said they made people lean. I wanted them to. The bell over the door kept up its job even after I turned the sign to closed for the evening. Friends should be allowed to ignore polite boundaries. People drifted in smelling of night air and wool and whatever they'd hurried through to get here. A few cradled cups wrapped in tea towels like small sleeping animals. A few looked like they'd come empty-handed, but not empty-hearted. Tea first, I said, which is how every good confession should start. Stories after. We'd posted about the event a week ago. Handwritten flyers on the lamppost by the bakery. A slightly awkward post on the town board. Kira's enthusiastic blast on whatever platform accepts paint-splattered thumbs. The rules were simple. If you had left a cup or taken one, if you had borrowed a story or returned one, if you had ever stood in front of the exchange and felt a small tug in your chest, come, bring the cup if you wanted. Bring your voice if you could. Bring your quiet if that's what you had. By 7, every chair was full. The teenagers colonized the rug near the front like bright, uncertain birds. The bridge club set up at the far end with a thermos of their own contraband decaf and a tin of lemon cookies, unrepentant. The 2 retired nurses wore matching cardigans in different colors, as if color were a phrase they'd agreed to say differently. Aaliyah waved from a side table, her star mug tucked into her elbow like a beloved book. Eli hovered near the shelves, eyes flicking to the strawberry cup as if it might decide to go for a walk. Lila stood near the back, fingers resting on the cracked porcelain's tag, and then lifting as if checking its pulse. I placed the first pot, jasmine for nerve and hospitality, on a trivet in the center and tapped a spoon against the clay rim. The sound was polite, surprised at itself. The room turned toward it. "Welcome," I said, and my voice behaved, mostly. "Thank you for coming to the first, maybe not the last, teacup telling night." A laugh rose and fell gently, the way small waves do when they've already decided to be kind. "Tonight we'll pour tea, and if you want, you'll pour something else. No pressure. We're here to listen. We'll keep refilling until the kettle is tired of us." I held up the linen-covered notebook I keep behind the till. It's thicker now, corners softened by thumbprints, a faint smudge of osmanthus blossom tea near the back pages. On the cover, in pencil, I'd written, "The Exchange, first pours," and left the eraser crumbs like a superstition. "This," I said, "has your words in it. I'll read a few if that's okay. And then we'll see where we go." I looked down to steady myself. The first entry I chose wasn't the earliest or the flashiest. It was just the one that had spent all afternoon tapping on the inside of my ribs. I read, "Thomas Crane, gift from Margaret Sundays, poems aloud. For anyone who wants a soft astonishment." Mr. Crane had come early and claimed the chair nearest the jar of peppermints he pretended not to like. At his name he lifted his hand, half salute, half blessing. The bridge club sighed collectively, a sound like pages turning. He cleared his throat and stood, leaning slightly on his cane. "Poems do sound better in a room like this," he said. "I always admired a room that behaves like a patient listener." He touched the brim of his hat to me. He'd remembered not to wear the hat indoors, and had placed it on the empty chair beside him like a spouse who'd arrived early. Margaret had a way of reading that made the words step into the air and behave themselves. She liked poems about kitchens and late light and the sort of ordinary heaven you can find when the kettle finishes and no one is rushing you. He smiled in a way that tugged at the air. "I took her Sunday cup here because things like that need to be in circulation. And because my granddaughter came to town and we read Neruda together and she rolled her eyes at the parts that were too much and I thought, well, she's right. But my God, if the man didn't occasionally catch a truth and handle it by the handle." Laughter, a peppermint unwrapped with ceremony. I poured him a psalm and he sat, thumb rubbing the saucer as if giving the china courage. "Next," I said quieter, as if not to scare the thing we were building. A hand I'd come to know raised, tentative as a first sprout. Aaliyah stood, star mug glinting. "I brought this in for midnight attempts," she said, voice steadier than it used to be. "For the nights that didn't need to be perfect to count. Today I drank from it at lunch, at my new job." Applause bubbled up and over without waiting for permission. Her smile ruled the minute. "I wrote myself a note," she added. "The day I left the mug here, rest is not a prize you win. It's a kitchen you have a key to. I used to not believe that. Now I do most days. So, thank you." A table of high schoolers, emboldened by Aaliyah's glow, coaxed one of their own up. He wore a hoodie with a zip that had lost its willingness to cooperate. He held the daisy cup with both hands as if it might pronounce judgment. "I borrowed this when I had to tell my dad I wasn't going to try out for baseball again," he said in a rush. We drank cocoa. I thought he'd be mad because I'm good at it, but he said he liked me better when I could stand up straight without pretending to be someone else. So, thanks to the person who left this, it made me aim for gentleness. He set the cup down like a promise and sat with a thump, cheeks blazing. The nurses, who have developed a hobby of adopting every teen who wanders in, beamed at him like a lighthouse. Stories pooled and braided. A man in a navy peacoat talked about the diner mug that had lived on his desk through a divorce and 2 promotions. For the hours between 2 and 4, he had written on the tag. And he read that line aloud and laughed at himself, head ducked. "Turns out I was braver and more tired than I knew," he said, and the room murmured in a language that doesn't get words. Kira approached with her mushroom volcano as if it were an old friend who had become funny-looking in middle age. "I left this so I wouldn't keep pretending my art had to be symmetrical to count," she said. "It is both ugly and perfect, and so am I, and on Tuesdays that's enough." She had added a tiny bluebell to its side weeks ago, paint stroked with care. "I also made you all a thing." She pointed toward the counter where she'd taped a new sign in her looping hand. "Some cups return when you're ready." The room's air changed in the way it does when a sentence finds a chair in you and sits down. Lila stood last among the early tellers. She held the cracked porcelain at the rim, thumbs stroking the fracture like a shoreline. "I took this home when I didn't know how to be a mother without a mother," she said. "I brought it back when I knew the answer was 1 cup at a time, 1 morning at a time, 1 story told to my daughter without pretending not to cry." She set it on the table. "It tastes like courage," she said. I tested to confirm. We poured again. Osmanthus white for forgiveness, lapsang when someone asked for something smoky to match a confession, honeybush for those who wanted a sweet without caffeine's chatty company. The kettle walked between tables in my hands. People leaned, passed cups, added sugar, stirred and waited and spoke. It felt like officiating a ceremony and also like being one of the guests. I did not speak about the bluebell cup yet. I wasn't ready to hold that thread in front of everyone, not until I could do it without my voice slipping on the wet stones of those words. I didn't have to. The night was building its own shape. Between tellings, I read small pieces from the notebook. Some were the texts of tags. Some were the bits people had asked me to add in. Some were my own notes scribbled as references, but now standing up straighter as they got to be read aloud. I read, "For the morning we'll pour into, even if our hands tremble." Lila smiled into her lap, for surviving twice. Kira thumped the boat mug like a shoulder, for lab partners who became actual partners, except then you realized one of you loved lab more. The chemistry teacher snort-laughed, unrepentant. Gift from Margaret, Sundays, poems aloud, for anyone who wants a soft astonishment. Mr. Crane closed his eyes at his wife's name like he could open a window in it, for pretend tea that turned real when Mom was tired. A woman pressed her lips together and nodded, eyes shiny. "For Tuesdays, when you must begin again, though it is not dramatic to do so." The Bridge Club clucked approval because Tuesdays are when they meet. And then I read one I hadn't yet shared. For the hours between open and closed, when you remember to trust, then forget, then remember again. I had written that for my grandmother's everyday mug when I finally added it to the exchange, the day my hands stopped shaking at the register. A silence with room in it followed, and I let it. There were tears. There was laughter that shook the teacups on their saucers. Someone started a round of applause for a woman who had brought in a chipped tabby cat mug, and the applause had momentum enough to gather 2 other tellers in its path. We moved at the speed of a kettle about to sing, not rushed, not dull, anticipation with steam. Halfway through, the door opened quietly. A woman I didn't know, hair damp from mist, slipped inside and stood near the shelves with the look of a person who has followed a trail of crumbs. She read tags, lips moving. She fixed on the strawberry cup. I had half a second to fear the feeling that reached for me, and then remembered that this is the point. I poured jasmine for her and set it on the counter as if I had been waiting. "Is it?" she whispered, nodding to the cup. "It is," I said. "Some cups come back." She breathed out like someone who had been trying not to. "I didn't know where else to bring this," she said, and produced a bulging envelope from her coat. Inside were prints, photographs of the cup in different kitchens, a windowsill with a geranium, a Formica table with a coffee ring, a cluttered studio with a paint-smeared hand holding the handle. On the back of each image, a date, a city, a note. Found in Templeton, used for mint tea while looking for new apartment. Detroit, held coffee for a night shift nurse. Missoula, paint water, sorry. Back here, today, because it never stopped tasting like summer. I wanted to hold those photographs like someone might hold a newborn and a relic simultaneously. We passed them around the table. The room moved in small, widening circles as each image found new hands. When the last one, the paint water confession, made the rounds, the room burst into laughter, the warm kind that forgives and promises to retell. "Would you tell it?" I asked her. "Tell us what made you bring it home to us?" She nodded, swallowed, began, quiet, then clearer. "I was visiting my aunt and I found it at the flea market in a box marked 50 cents, she said. "I don't know why I bought it. I didn't drink tea. I was moving a lot. A cup is a ridiculous thing to take from place to place when you're counting what fits in a backpack. But it looked like someone loved it, and it looked like it loved being loved. It followed me. It made me sit down in new kitchens and pretend I knew what sitting down felt like. Then I saw the article about your exchange and thought, oh, that's where it belongs." Eli, the teenager who'd first brought it to me, lifted a hand. "I brought that in," he said, grinning. "Thank you for not breaking it." "Thank you for noticing that I didn't," she said, grinning back. The room made a small sound that doesn't have a word. It could have been home. We poured a second teapot, Genmaicha, because the toasted rice smell reminds you that drinking tea can also feel like eating bread. New tellers stood. The man with immaculate shoes who'd left the espresso cup told a story about gossiping with himself at 2 p.m. and discovering that sometimes the cruelest rumors are the ones you start in your own head. He left $1 in the tip jar, and I pretended not to see him take it back out and then add a 5. A kid of 7, 8 at most, marched to the front with a thimble-sized pink cup from her doll set. "I left this here because my baby sister is a monster," she announced, and the room tilted with joy. Her mother covered her face with both hands and laughed through her fingers. "But the monster is my friend now," the kid added solemnly. "So someone else can borrow my bravery." She set the cup down like a duel was over and was carried back to her table by the pride on her parents' faces. Time loosened. The kettle did its rounds like a faithful dog. I read more lines from the notebook. People brushed shoulders and didn't apologize. We leaned. I leaned. I felt my grandmother at my back like a wall built charmed brick by charmed brick. I thought of the bluebell cup behind the counter and the letter I'd written to my sister and the absence that had softened at the edges enough to touch without bleeding. Near the end, when the candles had eaten themselves shy and the room had warmed into the kind of quiet that can carry weight, I reached for the bluebell cup. "I haven't told this one aloud yet," I said, "but it's part of what tonight is for the returns and for the beginning agains." I held the cup up, letting the painted flowers catch the light. The note inside, folded and refolded, felt soft as cloth. "For when you're trying to forgive yourself," I read, and if my voice faltered, the kettle covered for me. This cup came in with that note tucked in. I took it home. I made tea. I dreamed of my grandmother's garden. I wrote a letter to my sister I should have written years ago. We're still in the middle of that story, but the middle is further along than it used to be. I just wanted to say, some cups don't leave. They look back at you. And if you let them, they teach you how to look back at yourself with something softer. The room didn't applaud. It did something better. It breathed. It made a little bench in the air, and I sat on it. And then I set the cup down, and the bench didn't collapse. I could have wept from that alone. "Jade," Mr. Crane said, standing one last time, hat in hand. "Read the thing you wrote for your grandmother's mug, the hours between open and closed." I did, and when I finished, I added a line I hadn't known I was going to say. "And for the room between what we inherit and what we make, where it turns out we get to live." There it was. The door I had been walking toward all night without naming it. The room smelled like citrus peels and warmed dust, and the kind of anticipation that isn't nervous anymore. I looked around and saw that the shop had changed shape while I wasn't looking. The chalkboard menu still held "Harbor Smoke" and "Grandma's Jasmine" in my grandmother's ghostwriting, but below it newer scrawls had muscled in. "Aaliyah's Midnight Attempts, a quiet green tea blend we sell by request only. Sundays and soft astonishments. An Assam and vanilla combo that Mr. Crane swears makes Keats less pompous. Forgiveness blend, chamomile with a shy twist of lemon and 2 blue cornflowers for luck." This wasn't just her room. It was mine now. Not because I'd taken it, but because we had all laid something down on these floorboards and then taken something up and turned it into a way forward. The exchange wasn't a shelf anymore. It was a town square with porcelain cobblestones. The last teapot, oolong, rich and round, went empty. People stacked their cups, as if they were clearing a picnic at dusk. Someone blew out the jar candles, and for a breath the room smelled like every birthday you've ever wished through. I passed the peppermint jar. Mr. Crane took one like a man making peace with his secrets. I set the notebook on the table and left a pencil beside it with a small sign. "Add your line if you want." A few did, hunched over briefly like mechanics working on the engine of a story. Coats went on. Hands lingered on shoulders. The door opened and closed, letting in night that smelled like wet leaves and moon. The last teenager waved at the strawberry cup, a goodbye reserved for objects that are actually companions. We were down to a handful of us, Kira stacking chairs 2 at a time like a woman with strong opinions, the nurses wiping a spill that no one else had seen. Lila handing me the cracked cup to tuck behind the counter for safekeeping. Mr. Crane pocketing a peppermint with all the subtlety of a cat in a creamery. I carried the empty teapot to the sink and set it down gently, as if the whistle might be dreaming. "You did it," Kira said, sinking into a chair like a runner at a finish line, expression half smug, half tender. You made a long table and you made people lean and nobody fell. I didn't do it alone, I said, and touched the notebook. She pointed at me with one paint-stained finger. Yes, but you let it happen. That's half the job of making anything worth making. The nurses murmured their good nights like a duet that's been performed 1,000 times. Mr. Crane put his hat on with ceremony reserved for people you are about to miss in the 15 seconds you will be outside without them. You'll do this again, he said, not a question. If the kettle agrees, I said. It will, he said. It likes the sound of us. When the last door closed and the bell gave a sigh that sounded like a curtain coming down, I stood alone in the middle of the shop. I should have been exhausted. I was. But underneath the tired was something else, an energy that felt like a line of warm lights above a dark path. The tables were a little askew. The exchange shelf glowed as if one of the cups had learned electricity. The strawberry cup sat centered, tag lifting slightly in the draft from the heater, the gold dot a small star. The bluebell cup rested by the register, the note folded again inside, patient. My grandmother's everyday mug looked like it had always known we'd end up here. I opened the notebook one more time. On the last page, beneath a fresh line in someone else's handwriting, for when you forget and remember again in the same minute, I wrote, teacup telling night, full house. Stories poured and didn't spill. The room between what I inherit and what I make feels like what they call a life. Keep the light on. I left the lamp in the window as she did, because someone out there needs to know hot water is waiting. I brushed crumbs into my hand and didn't examine them because sometimes you're entitled to let sweetness remain untaxonomized. I straightened the chairs and did not make them perfect. I tied the tag back onto the cracked cup, a double knot this time, not because I feared it would run, but because some bonds like the feeling of being tied twice. Before I locked the door, I took the bluebell cup and set it on the exchange shelf beside the strawberry, between a boat-ready mug and a tabby cat survivor. I tied a new tag and kept the old note inside. The tag said, "For telling the story out loud when your hands still tremble." On my way out, I pressed my palm to the front glass and left a print that would fade by morning. The bell gave one last chime, a small thanks, a see you soon, a sound you can follow even after you step into the dark. The night air met me with a softness I had not earned but was allowed to borrow. Overhead, the town's handful of stars did their work in silence. I didn't plan on crying over a teapot, but when I got home I did anyway. One of those quick, clean cries that rinses a thing you plan to use again. I brewed a small cup in the chipped mug my grandmother had favored on Thursdays, because Thursday needed help, and sat at the window. Below, The street was a string of familiar possibilities. Behind me the kettle settled, cooling, satisfied. This place isn't just hers anymore. It's mine. Ours. It is not a shrine. It is a kitchen with a long table and a shelf full of proof that objects can be verbs. It is a ledger of tenderness. It is a room that knows how to listen and, when asked, how to speak. There are still stories steeping. There will always be. Some cups will come in wrapped in linen. Some will go out tucked under a coat. Some will break and be mended, gold gluing the fracture into a line that can carry light. Some will return after seasons you thought were an ending. Some will look back at you until you do the same. Tomorrow I'll turn the sign to open, and the bell will practice being joyful and succeed. I'll tie new tags, add new names to the notebook, say, "Tell me," and keep refilling the pot. Someone will point at a cup and say, "What's that one story?" And I'll say, "Tonight we learned it together." And the floorboards will hold, and the steam will rise like a standing ovation for the ordinary miracle of hot water finding its way into every crack and asking us gently to believe. And that ends tonight's meditation. You're welcome to stay for a bit longer if you like. Have a beautiful night. Until next time.